Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, it's day 2 of our literature unit. And we talked about the plot of our novel, which is Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, in our earlier unit, in our earlier reel, in our earlier lesson, however you want to put that. Today, we're going to focus on the author himself. And remember when we talked about the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, he set that particular book in the 1830s. So he set it even before, in a time period, even before his own birth. As we always do, we're going to read through this, and then we'll come back to talk about it. And, Tom, you know a lot about Samuel Clemens as well, don't you?
Well, not more than the next fella, but enough, I suppose.
More than our listeners, perhaps.
Maybe, but I've read a couple of his nonfiction books, Roughing It and A Tramp Abroad, and maybe some other stuff. I can't remember. Some of the short stories. But in any case, we're going to find out all about the life and times of Samuel Clemens here, or the writer Mark Twain. Let's get to it. Let's read the entire contents of our lesson now one time.
Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, was born in Missouri, U.S. in 1835. He was the 6th of 7 children and grew up in Hannibal, a frontier town next to the Mississippi River. Although he had a comfortable childhood, Twain's father died in 1847, leaving the family in hardship. Twain quit school at 13 and worked for his brother's newspaper. At 17, he left Hannibal and worked as a printer and a journalist in the eastern U.S. Twain became a licensed riverboat pilot in 1859 and took many ships up and down the Mississippi River. He loved the job and wrote many articles and stories about the experience. It was during this time that he adopted the pen name Mark Twain from a sailing term. The start of the Civil War in 1861 ended Twain's piloting career, however. He headed west and worked as a journalist and fiction writer. In 1870, Twain married Olivia Langdon. The couple had a son who died of diphtheria at 2 years old, and later had 3 daughters. Twain traveled across the U.S. and Europe on a lecture series and wrote a successful novel, The Gilded Age, in 1873. It was about corruption and abuse of the public's welfare. Twain then became a full-time writer and produced his best-known works, Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. These novels were the first to portray the difference in characters' social class through dialect. Twain became famous and was awarded honorary university degrees by Yale and Oxford. He died in 1910, having outlived his wife and children. Twain is remembered as a classic American author and the voice of an era.
Here we go, everybody. Let's talk about the content of today's lesson. Freedom and Slavery in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So today we're talking about the author himself. His pen name was Mark Twain, but his real name was Samuel Clemens, or better known as Mark Twain. He was born in Missouri, U.S. in 1835. Missouri, of course, is a state in the central part of the United States. I think during the Civil War it was a border state, and slavery was still legal there in Missouri, and they weren't involved in the Civil War, or they were, I'm not quite sure. Maybe there were a few battles there, I'm not quite sure, but in any case, he was the 6th of 7 children, which means he was from a big family, although at the time that was probably quite common.
Yeah, that's kind of normal for back then.
Nowadays, that would sound like a huge family.
Yeah.
There are a lot of families with no children or just one child, but they had 7 kids in this family, and he was next to the last there, and he grew up in a town called Hannibal, which is a frontier town next to the Mississippi River. I think there's a museum in Hannibal as well. I think I went there when I was a kid. I don't really remember, but in any case, that's where he grew up. Yes, indeed, it is a river town on the Mississippi River, and if we describe it as a frontier town, that just means it's a town on the frontier, which is kind of like in the untamed west of the United States at the time, and it was kind of out there, far away from civilization.
Yeah, there was probably a lot of, battles between American Indians and the people that were trying to settle the area at the time. A frontier area, you wouldn't have access to really fancy homes or, buildings.
Or internet.
Maybe even nice schools. Everything was really just starting out at this point. Yeah, if you went past the Mississippi River, you were in the wilderness. And we didn't call it the Wild, Wild West for nothing. It was pretty dangerous as you tried to settle the western part of the U.S. So although he had a comfortable childhood, meaning they weren't poor, but they weren't wealthy, but they had enough to meet their needs. Unfortunately, Twain's father died in 1847, and back then, it was pretty difficult for a mother to make a living and still take care of her children as well. So it left the family in hardship. Hardship here is non-countable, but it can be countable as well. He had a lot of hardships as he grew up, you could say that. Their family went through a lot of hardships after their father passed away. But you can also just use it like this in a non-count way, leaving the family in hardship. Or if someone's really poor, they live in poverty. It's a similar pattern there.
Yet they were in a difficult situation or a difficult financial situation. So Twain, or Samuel Clemens, quit school at the age of 13 and worked for his brother's newspaper. So his brother had a newspaper. Newspapers were very common back in those days. That's the main way people got information. It was still years away from radio and TV and internet. You had to rely on newspapers for information. And at the age of 17, he left Hannibal and worked as a printer and a journalist in the eastern U.S. So he went east to New York or Boston or Philadelphia or whatever and got a job out there as a printer, somebody who prints books or newspapers. And he was also a journalist, which means he was a reporter. He went out and got stories, wrote them up, and they were printed in newspapers.
He didn't have a lot of schooling. You can see he was probably in junior high when he quit. Of course, back then, we didn't really separate from elementary to junior high to high school. Those separations or classifications weren't in effect back then. So at 17, he left Hannibal after working for his brother's newspaper for a while. And at that point, he worked as a printer and a journalist in the eastern U.S. So he went to the East Coast, you could say, and started working as a journalist, reporting the news instead of just printing in a print shop that was producing a newspaper.
Yep, he was producing copy for newspapers. And then here in the next paragraph it says, Twain became a licensed riverboat pilot in 1859 and took many ships up and down the Mississippi River. On riverboats, of course, those are kind of different from normal boats. They're big and they've got a flat bottom with the thing in the back that spins.
Looks like a wheel, a paddle wheel.
I think they used to have one out in Danshui years ago.
Oh, really? Cool.
I think you could take rides on that or something. I don't know if it's there anymore, but they would have the two big smokestacks on the front there. They were really fancy.
Worked with steam, yeah.
Yeah, in Iowa now there's like riverboat gambling where you can get on a boat like that and it floats out into the river and you can do some gambling. You can play blackjack or whatever.
They would also call those riverboats steamboats.
Yep, powered by steam indeed. And so, in order to be the captain of the ship, you actually are a pilot. You're the person who drives the ship. We have pilots in airplanes, of course, but at this time we also had pilots in riverboats. And I guess he really liked that job. He loved the job and wrote many articles and stories about the experience. I think actually there's a book about that he wrote, Life on the Mississippi, and he does describe the job as being a riverboat pilot quite in detail in that book. Check it out. It's probably available online for free, Life on the Mississippi. But he loved the job and wrote many articles, and it was during this time that he adopted the pen name Mark Twain from a sailing term. I think it's kind of a way they measure things. Twain means two, so Mark 1, Mark Twain. At least that's how I learned it when I was a kid.
Yeah, I don't know any sailing terms, so I'm going to take what you said as fact, Tom. So that's how he came up with his name. I'm sure he met a lot of very interesting people of all classes, you know, on a riverboat. So that would be fun for him. He loved to study people and loved to break down their characters and why they did what they did. Now, the start of the Civil War happened back in 1861, and that ended Twain's piloting career. I bet that river was very valuable to the Southerners who were fighting. Remember, it was considered to be a Southern state at that point. He didn't want to be involved, so he took off and went further west, ending his piloting career on a riverboat. Civil here is a word we use to describe what happens within this country, one country itself. Typically, when you have a war, you're fighting other countries, right? But if you have a civil war, it's really awful because you're actually fighting people who are citizens in your own country. It can be very sad. Our Civil War actually had families splitting up. Some brothers would go fight for the Southerners, you know, and fight for the slavery system they'd set up, because slaves were important to a lot of those tobacco farmers who would grow tobacco. And then other people in the family might side or believe that the North was correct, not the South. So it was a very sad time in America.
Yep, the Civil War, and that began in 1861, and that ended his piloting career, and he headed west as a journalist and as a fiction writer, writing books of fiction like Mark Twain and Tom Sawyer. And you know something? That brings us about to the midway point in today's lesson, so let's take a break now. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny. 今天我们要继续来看这部文学作品《哈克历险记》Adventures of Huckleberry Finn。 好，我们之前谈到了这个作品的内容，整个故事的发展。接下来我们要谈这个作品的作者，大家都听过，也很知道他是谁。Mark Twain。 不过提到 Mark Twain， 这是他的笔名，而他真正的名字呢，反而大家不太清楚，叫做 Samuel Clemens。 好，那所以一开头这边就说到了 Samuel Clemens better known as Mark Twain。 好，这个当然 known as 我们注意到中间这个逗点隔开的这一部分是来修饰 Samuel Clemens，我们比较知道他的名字是 Mark Twain。 不过这个被动的过去分词，我们也知道，当一个人他以什么样的角色，以什么样的称呼，以什么样的头衔而闻名，我们会说一个人是 is known as。 好，加 as 后面接的是 title 或者是角色。当然如果你是加 for for， be known for something， 那就表示是以什么样的特点特质而闻名。好，那我们继续下面往下看，下面就提到 Mark Twain， 当然他事实上他来自的家庭呢，他7个孩子里头，他排行第6，而且他来自的地方事实上是在美国的一个密西西比河旁边的一个边境的城镇。那虽然小时候过得还不错，可是因为 Mark Twain 的爸爸很早就去世了，所以这也让 Mark Twain 之后变成很早就得离开学校，而且要工作要赚钱。不过下面比较有趣的是，他在1859年他成了一个 riverboat pilot， 这个就代表 这个开船的驾驶员，而且你知道他是一个 licensed riverboat pilot， 意思就是说他是有执照的。好，当你 license 这个字如果当动词来使用，当然是发给执照，所以当你用它的 ed 的形式，也就是用过去分词，就表示他被给执照，他有执照，他是合格的。好，再来，我们知道这个工作当然对他来说，其实他非常的喜欢，他感到非常有兴趣，所以在这当中，他其实还写了不少有关于这一段生活的这种作品跟故事。但是下面就要提了一个重要的句构，因为就是在这一段期间，也就是这个期间呢，他开始用他的笔名 Mark Twain。 好，那我们来看这个句构，这是分列句。It was during this time that blah blah blah。 我们知道，当你用分列句这样的句构，常常就是为了强调，有时候你要强调的是这个原来句子的主词或受词，或是地点或时间都没有关系，而这个地方强调的就是时间 during this time， 就是这一段他在开船的这段日子。好，那他呢开始用笔名。那我们知道这个 Mark Twain 其实也是跟这个船上面的用语有关。那如果当水手，你讲 Mark Twain， 这个 Twain 其实代表的是他们在船上画记啊。刚水深有多深的时候，你就要画一个记号等等。那我们知道这个笔名原来是来自这里的。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain. Mark Twain was his pen name. So we talked about how he grew up in Missouri. He was actually on the very corner of the state. If you look up where he was born, it was actually called Florida, Missouri. But Florida was the city name, and the state was Missouri. So he had a lot of brothers and sisters. He was second to the last of the kids in his family. And he grew up, though, I guess they must have moved from the time he was born, in a frontier town next to the Mississippi River. And remember, that was the river, or the town was called Hannibal. He had a pretty good childhood, at least until his father died in 1847. And then they had financial problems, of course. I'm sure the older kids in his family tried to help out. You would, go and get a job at a young age sometimes back then, because you just had to. There wasn't a welfare system. You couldn't ask the government for money. You had to go and do what you could to bring in money for your family, and that's what he did. He quit school early and worked for his brother's newspaper, but when he was 17, he took off and began working as a printer and a journalist in the eastern part of the U.S. We found out he was licensed to be a riverboat pilot or captain, and it was during this time that he came upon his pen name. It's from a sailing term, Mark Twain, and he kind of liked it. We mentioned that the Civil War, the war that where half of America, the Northerners, were fighting the Southerners, and to see if they were going to keep slavery as a system in the U.S. Fortunately, the Northerners won, and we got rid of slavery. I also wanted to mention the civil word here. It's one of our vocab words. We also use the term civil servants to describe people who work, for example, the post office, or maybe they work for the police force. If you're a civil servant, your job is to help take care of anything the government has put in place. So you're paid by the taxpayers who pay taxes in. That goes towards your salary if you're a civil servant.
Yep, or a government employee, you could say that as well. So, yes, he headed out west. I think that also became the fodder, I guess, or the inspiration for his work.
The material he used.
The material, Roughing It. That's also one of his works of nonfiction. And in 1870, Twain married Olivia Langdon. The couple had a son who died of diphtheria at 2 years old and later had 3 daughters. So he lost a son from diphtheria. Sorry, I don't quite know how to say that in Chinese. You'll probably have to wait for the Chinese teacher to tell you that. But Twain traveled across the U.S. and Europe on a lecture series and wrote a successful novel, The Gilded Age, in 1873. So this is one form of entertainment they had back in the day. People could travel around and give lectures or speeches, and people would pay to come and see you. So this is a lecture series. I think they still have those. People go around speaking all the time. You can go see someone give a speech or something about some particular topic. So a lecture basically just means it's a speech where you learn things.
Yeah, and in his case, he was considered what we call a humorist. So what he shared with the audience was often very funny. He was quite successful. A lot of authors we talk about never see success while they're alive. It's after they die that their books become better known. But he was quite popular. People thought Mark Twain was pretty great. They loved to go and see his lectures. He didn't just tour America or the U.S. He would also go over to Europe. I'm sure he made a lot of money in Europe. They were more established. There was a lot of old money in Europe. There was a lot of wealth. And you wanted to invite him to your parties, of course, if you were somebody who was pretty wealthy or famous, or maybe you were royalty, because he would entertain everybody. He did write a successful novel. Tom talked about the novel's name was The Gilded Age. The gilded just means really expensive. Usually we use it to talk about, somebody who puts gold all over their house. Maybe they have a gold toilet like Trump did, or Trump does. Anyway, he was living in the Gilded Age. There was a lot of money, not just in Europe, but in America especially, because there was no income tax at that point. So if you made a lot of money, you were really wealthy.
That's right. So you wouldn't need to be on welfare. So yes, indeed, The Gilded Age came out in 1873 about corruption and abuse of the public's welfare. The money that's going to the public and stuff. So yes, indeed, there's lots of corruption that's mentioned in that book. And Twain then became a full-time writer and produced his best-known works, Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Nowadays, we're kind of used to putting a "the" there, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but I think the original titles did not have the definite article in their titles, so therefore Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which of course is our featured work of literature for this month. And these novels were the first to portray the difference in characters' social class through dialect. So to portray here just means to represent something, usually in the form of a play. It could be in the form of a painting or something, how you present something. So the differences in social class are presented or portrayed by their dialect, how they talk. I don't know if you can do that so much in a novel because you can't actually hear it, but you can definitely use writing to let people know how people talk, and you can tell how the grammar works for certain classes of people. As I mentioned before, people that I grew up with in my hometown were working class, so they kind of had their own grammar on things that they used all the time, not the same stuff we learned in school.
I think with dialect, I wanted to mention it's not an entirely new language. For example, there are a lot of differences in the French language. Haitians speak French, but their French is very different from the French in France, or even the Canadian French, which is different from the French in France as well. So they'll have different words, maybe some different pronunciation as well. So he became famous and was awarded honorary university degrees. If you get an honorary degree, it means you didn't go to the class, you didn't take all the tests, but you've done something really spectacular with your professional life. And these universities want to acknowledge you. They think you're great. So he got degrees by Yale and Oxford, although he didn't study there himself. He died in 1910 as a very, very sad man because, unfortunately, his wife and his children preceded him in death, which means they all passed away before he did. You never want to outlive your kids, that's for sure. But he'd also outlived his wife. I saw a biography on this guy on the History Channel years ago, and it was very sad. And he became more and more pessimistic and negative as he got older because his life was filled with sadness.
Right, so if you read his later works, they're going to be a little less entertaining, more sad, more bitter and cynical, I suppose. And also, I should note that in 1910, the world saw Halley's Comet. Some people say Halley's Comet.
Oh, I do too. I say Halley.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be Halley, though. And it actually came to the Earth when he was born, too. 1835, Halley's Comet came, and also in 1910. So that's kind of interesting that he lived to see Halley's Comet twice. But in any case, yes, he's dead now, but we can still read his books. And fortunately for us, lots of those books are available for free online. You don't have to pay a red cent for them. Enjoy, and there's a lot of stuff that he wrote. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
好，那我们继续来看 Mark Twain 他这个人生真的是蛮有趣的，他做了各种不同的工作，他最喜欢做的就是当水手。好，那我们提到他笔名的来源，那至于他个人，他的婚姻呢？对，他在1870年结婚了，然后呢有一个儿子，可是很可惜的，在2岁的时候，这个小孩就过世了。之后，好，他还有3个女儿，然后他接下来在美国在欧洲各地旅游，还进行一系列的演讲。好，那我们来看看他有什么作品。这边讲的也是他的成名作，第一个让大家说他是一个成功的小说作品是 The Gilded Age。Gilded Age 这代表镀金的年代，而这个作品谈的其实跟腐败跟利用公众福祉有关。好，不过最有名的还是我们知道现在大家都晓得的这2本书，一个就是 Adventures of Tom Sawyer 汤姆历险记，那还有一个也就是我们今天所探讨的哈克历险记。那这2本小说有什么特色，有什么不一样的地方呢？好，下面就说到了 These novels were the first to portray the difference in characters' social class through dialects. 我们知道 dialect 它讲的是方言哦。好，还有一个，当你说 the first to， 记得 first 后面，当你说谁他是第一个进来的，是第一个来开门的 the first to do something 后面是用不定词。好，我们今天的讲解就到这边，谢谢大家。
That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join us again next time when we continue to discuss Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Please join us then. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.